The Prime Minister will obey the law without obeying what the law apparently says.
Well, I think there is a puzzle here. I think we've been very, very clear is that we will comply with the law. And you saw that in terms of the recent Supreme Court judgment. The government, in good faith, said we were proroguing Parliament. And in fact, there were a number of senior judges who agreed with the government's position until we got to the Supreme Court judgment. We disagree with that Supreme Court judgment, but we absolutely respect the judiciary, we respect the Supreme Court, and we have complied with that, and that is precisely what we want to do.
A different law, aren't we? We're talking about the so-called Benn Act, which seems very clear on the surface of it to all MPs I've spoken to, and indeed all lawyers. It seems to say that if the Prime Minister can't get the backing of Parliament to leave without a deal, he's got to ask for a Brexit delay. So I just ask you again, how can you obey that law without apparently being prepared to obey that law?
Well, what the government's position is that we are trying very hard to make sure we get a deal, Nick. And we have got the Brexit Secretary in Brussels this morning. You've got the Prime Minister's European Advisor in Brussels this morning. We have submitted, as you know, technical documents setting out our position, and those discussions have been continuing at pace. From our perspective,
if you'll forgive me, Mr. Sharma, that's actually an interesting answer, but it's an answer to a different question. This question is about what happens if you don't get a deal and the law kicks in, and the law says that you would have to seek an extension to Brexit because you wouldn't have the House of Commons backing for a no-deal Brexit. So I'm going to ask you for the third time, how do you obey that law and yet not obey the law and leave the EU anyway?
We are going to obey the law. We have shown that we obey the law as a government. We will continue to do that. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I think what your listeners will want to hear is that as a government, we are working very hard to make sure we deliver a deal.
Indeed.
I think we're cautiously optimistic on that. Yeah. But you're also absolutely right, Nick, is that we have said, the Prime Minister said, we are leaving on the 31st of October. And there is a fundamental point here about the fact that there has been a loss of trust in the democratic process because we didn't deliver on the referendum up until this point. And you saw that in the European elections. You saw that in the council elections that took place. And Conservative MPs, Labour MPs, we stood on manifestos in 2017 to say we would respect the outcome of the referendum. That is what we must now do.
I'm going to come back to that, if I may, because it's an important point you make there. I do want to pursue one last time, though, how you do what you're saying you're going to do. Have you in the Cabinet discussed what you will do in the event that you don't get a deal with the EU and the law passed by the House of Commons says that there must be an extension to Brexit? To put it more crudely, Mr. Sharma, do you actually know what the answer to this puzzle is, or have you not asked or not been told by the Prime Minister?
Well, Nick, I think you will realise that what I'm not going to do is to set out any discussions that have happened in the privacy of the Cabinet.
No, I wouldn't expect you to do that. But you could answer a simple question, which is, have you discussed it? Do you, even if you don't want to tell us the answer, do you, a Cabinet Minister, know the answer to that question?
Well, you've just acknowledged that you understand that I'm not going to discuss what is or isn't set out in Cabinet, and I don't intend to do that.
Do you know the answer to the question,
Mr. Sharma? Well, the answer to the question is that we are absolutely going to comply with the law. We will be working incredibly hard to get a deal, but we will be leaving on the 31st.
You see,
of October.
the danger of not answering the question is we're 34 days away from what most people agree is the most important decision in our peacetime history, the potential of a no-deal Brexit. And if you use words in the way you are, is the danger that you appear to be playing a game, or to quote Dominic Cummings overnight, you appear to be enjoying this?
We're certainly not playing any kind of game. What I would say to you is that, come out on the doorstep. I mean, I regularly am knocking on doors in my constituency, and actually whether people voted leave or remain, the vast majority want to get Brexit done and to get on and focus on all the other issues that matter to people, which is, more funding for schools, which have announced, more police officers, another 20,000 the Prime Minister has announced, and actually more funding for the NHS. Again, that's what we've announced.
Talked about a loss of trust.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, of course you want to get onto it, but I think everybody would agree that the funding of all these services depending on getting Brexit right. So you talked about the loss of trust a second ago. Are you, as a unnamed Cabinet Minister has said to the Times this morning, do you believe that there is the chance of, quote, a violent popular uprising if a second referendum were held and overturned the result of the first one?
Well, look, I mean, that's not sort of language I have ever used, and that's not sort of language that I would use ever in the future.
Do you use the language of surrender bill, which has been controversial in recent days?
Well, actually, let's look at the phrase surrender bill. If you look at the fundamentals of what that bill does, it does surrender our ability to have a effective discussion with the European Union, and it does surrender our ability to be able to walk away from the table if that's what happens.
Who are you surrendering to, in your view, Mr. Sharma? Who are we surrendering to?
Well, we are surrendering our ability to negotiate effectively with the European Union. And I would just say to you, Nick, is that if you were going into a negotiation with both your hands tied behind your back, would you not think that was somehow some form of capitulation?
Happily, I'm not doing the negotiations, which the country will breathe a sigh of relief about. Let me just ask you.
You will have done negotiations. So I'm just making
there's just this convention where I ask you the question. So Rory Stewart, until a few weeks ago, did the job that you now do. He has served his country with distinction, taking serious personal risks in Afghanistan and Iraq. You have since expelled him from the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Are you suggesting that Mr. Stewart and people like him are interested in surrendering to foreign powers?
Well, there are very many colleagues who have served the country in different ways, and I have fundamental respect for all of them. There's no doubt about that on all sides.
You have respect, but do you think he's in favour of surrendering?
Well, again, you raised the point about having the Conservative whip removed from people.
Forgive me, Mr. Sharma, I asked you a question. I didn't ask you about the whip being removed. I asked you whether you think the word surrender applies to Rory Stewart.
Well, no one has used the term surrender in respect of any individual and not Rory Stewart. The point I think you were making is that why was the whip removed from Rory Stewart?
No, I was asking whether the language is fair and reasonable in this situation, and you're saying it is fair, and I'm saying if it is fair, it must apply to the people who are in favour of doing what you disagree with. You are suggesting that a former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, is in favour of surrender. A former Chancellor, Ken Clarke, is in favour of surrender. Rory Stewart, who served this country abroad, they're all in favour of surrender by your language.
Well, no one has used that language to describe individual members of Parliament. What we're talking about is actually the Benn Act itself. And I would just point out that actually, parties throughout the ages have given descriptions to bills and acts in a way to make it very clear to the public what they think of that bill and act. If you look at the community charge, if you look at the, there's a number of other bills and acts that are out there where political parties have chosen to describe them in a particular way. I've set out to you why I think it is appropriate to talk about the Benn Act as surrendering sovereignty in certain areas, and that is just fundamentally the case. It does restrict our ability to be able to negotiate effectively with the European Union.
Does it make you pause for thought when you read a tweet, if you have, and you may well have done because it's been widely reported, from the daughter of a Member of Parliament, Yvette Cooper's daughter, described being scared by tweets that called her mother a traitor, and scared when her house is fitted with panic buttons, industrial locking doors, and explosive bags to catch the mail. Now, everyone agrees that politics has always had robust language, and everyone's entitled to be robust. But does that make you pause for thought?
Well, as I've said to you, is that that absolutely should not be happening. That is completely deplorable. And the Prime Minister himself has said very clearly that he totally deplores any kind of intimidation of anyone, whether they're members of Parliament or members of the public.
But what's your responsibility as senior politicians of the Prime Minister to improve things? What, if anything, could you do to make it better?
Well, I think there are two things here. One is that, of course, all of us, all politicians on all sides, need to make sure that we have a calm and reasoned debate around this issue. But there is a fundamental point, as I said earlier, Nick, which is that there is a huge amount of frustration across the country that we have not delivered on Brexit.
Okay.
And that, I think, is what we need to do. And then we can move on to all the other issues that actually matter to our constituents.
Alok Sharma, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.